Okay, so in the previous video, we looked at how to create select queries. As a quick recap, a select query does not actually modify the data. Basically, you are entering criteria and say, give me the records that meet this criteria. And that criteria is simply the value of one of the fields in the underlying table. Now, once you run the query and you have the records in front of you, you can make changes manually, but it's important to realize that the query itself, a select query in and of itself running it, does not change any of the data. What we're going to look at now are queries that do indeed modify data. So let's get started. At the top here, we have the Create tab, and we're going to click on Query Design again. And like I said, you can close this out if you want to use it. Feel free. I feel it's redundant because everything is listed over here. Not to mention that this is just yet another window cluttering things up. So as I said, when you create a query, it defaults to a select query. We're going to jump over here and do an update query. So we click on Update Query. What we do is we drag one of the tables over, and these are the fields that you can make the query on. So we are going to do a couple things. First, we are going to have a change of city name. Why? Maybe the city merged with another city, or maybe someone made a huge donation, they renamed it. I don't know how often city names change, but it could. Before we do that, though, we're going to go into the underlying table and add a few more records just to remove any doubt about how accurately this worked. So if we open up the sellers table, as you can see, the query is still here. Sellers is here. Right now, if I was to change the city name, well, they all have the same city name, so you could say, well, maybe it just changed them all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple records that have a different city name. That way you know beyond a shadow of doubt, oh yeah, it only changed the ones that matched. So let's add a few more records. And let's see. And since I know what the next query I'm going to run after that is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have two cities have the same name even though they're in different states. Okay. So we're going to close this, and as I mentioned before, when you do data entry, as soon as you move from one cell to another, that's it. That data has been saved. So this shouldn't prompt me to save, because when it's prompting you to save, again, it's saving the structure, not the data. The data is saved immediately. So let's go ahead and close this. So we're back at our query now. We're going to take seller city. I'm going to drop it down here. As you see, here's the criteria field, and here's update to. So based on this criteria, the value in this field will be changed to this. So what's the value? Now, because this field is formatted as text, when I navigate away from this, you're going to see it's going to add the quotes. So again, that gives you a hint. It reminds you what this field is formatted as. What do we want it to be updated to? And again, it adds the quotes. And that's it. That is the basis of a update query. You say what field you want changed. You say what is the criteria. And then what do you want to change it to? So if we click on the Design tab and we click on Run, now this is very important. Depending on how many rows you have in your table, depending how well you know the data, this can be incredibly useful information. We know for a fact that there are 4 rows that have that current value in the city field. So we know that this is right. So if this said 6, then you could say, wait a second, there's only 4, something's wrong. Now, again, it's a small table, so it's easy to detect, but it might be worth your time to run a select query first to get a feel for how many records are out there. That way, when you see this prompt, you'll know if it's really the first test as to whether or not you've done this correctly. We know there's 4 rows, so we'll do yes, and nothing particular happens. So if we come back to settlers, you can now see that indeed 4 rows were changed from their previous value to the new value. And there you go. That, in a nutshell, is an update query. Having said that, we only used one value as criteria. You can actually use multiple. And there's a couple ways you can do this. So, you can have additional fields here. So if we take state and drag this down here, you can put in a condition here as well. If the conditions are in the same criteria row, then it's and. In other words, this and this has to be true. If you're to put it on if you were to travel vertically down the column, then as you can see, those are treated as or. So if this or this, then make the change. So what we're going to do is the criteria, in this case, will be that. And we know that there are 2 that meet that criteria. But, as I said, we're going to do an and criteria. So there's going to be a second condition that needs to be met. Only one meets both of these criterias, where their city is that value and the state is that value. Now again, it seems like overkill because if it's just one, why not go in there and manually change it? Absolutely. Having said that, we don't have a large data set to work with. So I created the data just so you get an idea of how this functions. Not to mention that sometimes when there's a lot of data, people get distracted and they're looking at the data instead of the functionality that I'm trying to communicate. So, again, since these are on the same row, it's and. So this has to be this, and this has to be this. And what gets updated? Well, let's update the city to something else. Let's call it. Now, just to be clear, you're technically not inserting this. You're actually overwriting this. It's just I'm being unoriginal and couldn't think of a different name. So, if we have a row where the value in this matches and this matches, then the value for this one should get updated to that. So again, we go to the Design tab. We click on Run. You are about to update one row. So far, so good. We know there's only one row that meets this condition. So again, when you see these pop-ups, don't just click your way through it. See if what it's saying makes sense to you. So we click on Yes. As you can see, when I went to the table, the one that met both conditions were indeed changed. The one that met only one condition was not changed. Absolutely perfect. That is the way this is supposed to work. So if you want, we can save this. So if we close query, it'll prompt us, do you want to save changes? We can say yes. We haven't named it, so we can call this, again, using the best practice naming criteria. We'll put QRY and an underscore in front, and we'll call this city underscore update. Now, would you necessarily need to save this query? If it's a one-off, probably not. But one of the things that it does is when you create a query or any other object, the properties of it are stored. So if you're trying to remember 2 years from now, hey, when we change that, you can come over here, you can right-click, you choose Object Properties, and you can indeed see that this was created on that date at that time. Whether that's worth keeping or not, it's up to you. There's no guarantee that you should or should not keep it, but it also, by saving the query, you've saved that logic. So you could go back sometime and say, oh, that's why that happened. It looked right at the time, but wasn't, or whatever. So this does help. So in summary, keeping the query if you never run it again is potentially a good way to remember exactly what you did, because you can see the actual logic that was run. Okay, so that, as we said, was, let's click here and go to Design View. That was the update type query. And I think that's it for this one. So, okay, so let's close this table. And yeah, I think that's it for update queries for now. And now we're going to look at the next type of query. So query design, close that. And so that was update. We're going to do make table. So we'll click on this one. Now you get a new pop-up that you've never seen before. Table name. So we're going to create a new table. Let's call this purchases underscore 09 underscore 17. All right, so before I go any further, sometimes what will happen is a database will create temporary tables. What it does, it takes some values from, say, the production database and create a temporary table, maybe a transactional table, or some kind of summary table, like new clients, that kind of thing. And it creates a temporary table that is used for maybe reporting. So a financial institution may do that. They may say, here's all the new accounts that were created in September of 2017. The table will be out there for a year. I know a year doesn't sound like it's temporary, but the idea is that they create a table that has a specific termination point. Because usually when you create a table, it doesn't have a termination point. This is like a permanent part of the database that you're making, such as human resources or a product table, whatever. So a so-called temporary table, functionally it's a table, it's just your intent. Your intent is that it's going to have a really a predefined termination point. And like I said, financial institutions, they may create a redundant table that has transaction summaries, client summaries, new account summaries, and they specifically date it based on, or should I say they name it based on the date in which that data applies to. So what we're going to do is it's going to make a table. And so we gave it that name. So what is it going to have? Well, let's bring sellers over. And maybe we want everything that was created within a certain month. So that would be, actually we don't want sellers, I apologize. Remove table. This one will be for the actual main table, books and games. So we want to know the purchase date. So again, we're talking about transactions in this case. So just like last time, we need to pause for a moment. Let's go into the books and games table. And here's the problem. We don't have any dates. So I'll just put some dates in here so that you know that it works. So we're going to say this one will be September 1st. This one will be, say, September 15th. This one will be September 13th. This one, let's make this August. We'll make this one also August. And we'll make this one also September. And we'll make this one, say, July. So again, if we're going to make a table, say, based on date, and we're going to look at September, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 for September. So again, so when you run these queries and it gives you those prompts, that's, like I said, your early warning system as to whether or not the information makes sense. This time it's not such a big deal because you're creating a new table. You can always delete it, whereas in the previous query, you were specifically changing data in your live table. You're changing the source table. Okay, so what do we want to do? Close that. So let's take our purchase date. Actually, let's take all our fields because when we did the previous query, the city update, we really didn't, we just needed to change the field. So we only needed the bare minimum fields to check and change. Whereas if we're creating a table, we probably want to carry all this information over. So that's the reason why I'm taking a different approach. And by the way, that was just typical Windows. Click on the first, hold Shift, click on the last, it selects everything in between. Okay, so yeah, so that is why I'm choosing all the fields this time, because last time we only needed the bare minimum. This time we want to take this data and store it somewhere. So, purchase date, we want it to be September. Okay, so what we're saying is we want something in this to match the month of September. So there's a few ways you can go about this. You can look at just the month of the field, or you can actually put in a date range. So what you could do is you could say, and again, this is the criteria row, so greater than, say, 08/31/2017. Remember, you don't want to say greater than 09/01 because then that means you don't include September 1st. And less than, and again, you don't want to use the last day of September, you want to use the first day of October, or else you're missing a day. So less than 10/01/2017. Click down here, and as you can see, it added the pound signs. So again, this is letting you know what this field is formatted as, because you could potentially format as text and manually type in a date. Then it would be very hard to do a calculation. Okay, so if I haven't forgotten anything, that's about all we need. So we click on Design. We click on Run. You're about to paste 4 rows into a new table. So again, we did say there are 4 rows. So let's click Yes. And over here, purchases 09/17 were created. So let's give that a double click. The 1st, 15th, 13th, and 9th. So if you want, you can open the table to confirm that those are the right ones. So books and games. So RE Rev 2 was 09/01. Legend of Dragons 09/15. Legend of Dragons 09/15. Mysteria. And Jacob's Stepladder. So there you go. You know for a fact that it worked correctly, and you have that table. So again, when I say temporary table, it's still a normal functional table. It's just one of intent. In other words, as a database manager, you have set in your mind that we are going to eventually delete this table after a certain period of time, whereas you should, these other tables, you're not going to delete your central table. You're not going to delete your sellers table. You may make additions to it, but you're not just going to straight up delete that table. So again, nothing functionally different about a temporary table. It's just one of intent. Okay, so we covered 2 different types of queries. I think that's enough for one video. I really don't want to get into the other ones yet. So there's an example of how to take data that's in a table and replace it. And the other one is how to take a selection of data from a table and create a whole new table for whatever purpose, whether it be for reporting purposes, that kind of thing. Like maybe you have a fraud department and they want to know which accounts were opened, what type of accounts were opened. Anyways, that should do it for this video. If you have any questions, just let me know, and I hope these continue to be helpful. So I'll probably do one more video about queries, and then I believe we'll either do reports or jump into forms. I think forms should probably be the last step, because at that point, that's when we take all this mush and give it a user-friendly interface, and that it's something that even a non-database person could use, because right now, this is very technical, and this is not what you want your end users to see. We're going to shut off the panel here. We're going to shut off the ribbon. They're not going to see the tables. They're not going to see the queries. They're just going to see forms that have buttons and fields. So it gives structure. It gives standardization. And at that point, like I said, just about anyone who knows how to do data entry would then be able to use your database. All right, so that should do it for now.